The ship broke apart almost instantly. No incoming aircraft had been sighted. No torpedo tracks were visible. At 5:17 hours, a thunderous explosion erupted beneath the transport ship, SS Leedstown. The blast shattered its hull plating and disabled its engines almost instantly. It begins with a quiet morning on the North Atlantic, September 21, 1940, when convoy HX-72, steaming west of the Hebrides, entered what sailors would later call the Dead Corridor. Though the term was coined much later, its origins lie in the sudden and devastating appearance of a new German threat. Within minutes, a second explosion claimed another transport. Chaos rippled across the convoy. Officers shouted bearings, engines reversed, escorts maneuvered frantically in water barely deep enough for evasive action. These were not torpedoes slicing in from U-boats, nor the thunderous blasts of aerial bombs. Instead, they were silent weapons planted beneath the waves, magnetic and acoustic naval mines, engineered to detonate without a single visible trigger. To those aboard nearby ships, it felt as though the seabed itself was erupting in violent spasms. Yet the surface gave no hint of what triggered the destruction. For the merchant crews aboard ships like the SS Scholar and SS Elmbank, the danger was invisible. Their escorts, destroyers HMS Volunteer, HMS Skeena, and a handful of corvettes still learning the complexity of convoy protection, could scan the horizon for periscopes, but nothing prepared them for mines buried deep below. Historical insight into that moment comes from a post-action report filed by Lieutenant Commander Harold Peters of the USS Dallas. In it, he noted, "Explosive force appears upward in column. No torpedo wake observed. Debris suggests hull rupture from below." In the pre-dawn darkness, a dull hum reverberated through the water. Moments later, a blast tore through the hull of a freighter carrying ammunition. Some men recalled seeing the sea itself lift in a glowing arc of fire. Then silence again, dense, terrifying silence. Peter's assessment echoed the earliest suspicions. These were not torpedo strikes. Rather, they were consistent with tethered mines placed deliberately in patterns that mirrored fishing grounds. The struggle that followed was unlike the chaos of a submarine attack. There were no torpedo wakes or radar returns to track. Instead, sailors were forced to confront an unseen enemy that struck without pattern or warning. The camouflage was simple but effective. Many of the buoy markers had been modified by Vichy French coastal units cooperating with German advisors, tying steel cables beneath them to rows of contact mines arranged just beneath the surface. Survivors spoke of the mine you never hear, and this uncertainty caused panic to ripple through the convoy. The escorts scrambled to respond, but escort doctrine in 1940 was built for U-boats, not highly sensitive seabed traps. Divers from the U.S. Navy's newly formed Explosive Ordnance Disposal Units examined wreckage later that week. They recovered fragments of French M1926 mines, old but reliable devices, paired with German-supplied detonator horns. Every maneuver risked activating another device. The convoy slowed, then stopped entirely, unsure of how far the minefield extended. That moment, frozen on a restless sea, would later be seen as one of the earliest turning points in the Allies' battle to understand German mine warfare. The discovery stunned commanders. No one had anticipated that Axis forces would resort to such hybrid minefields, blending outdated stock with precision deployment. The use of local fishing markers as visual cover only deepened the mystery. Historical insight into this moment comes from a Navy Admiralty dispatch dated 2 weeks after the incident, which read, enemy appears to utilize new magnetic influence mechanism, sweeping procedures insufficient. Had reconnaissance flights simply overlooked them, or had operatives placed them under cover of darkness in the days before Torch? At the time, magnetic mines were a relatively recent innovation, dropped by aircraft or deployed by submarines to disrupt shipping lanes. The Germans, realizing Britain's survival depended on imported supplies, refined these devices rapidly. The reveal grew more complicated when survivors from SS Leedstown reported seeing no explosion at the moment of impact, only feeling a massive upward jolt before the ship began to break apart. Their mechanism was simple in principle but deadly in nature. Sensing the magnetic signature of a passing vessel, the mine would calculate the moment of greatest destructive potential before detonating. This suggested that the mines were placed at varying depths, some designed to trigger against deep draft vessels and others against landing craft or destroyers. The intricacy of the pattern pointed to deliberate intelligence about Allied vessel types and expected routes. For the crews of HX-72, the reveal came gradually. Investigators from the Royal Navy Minesweeping Division arrived days later, once the sea had calmed. Divers found fragments of casings unlike anything previously recovered, smooth shells with delicate internal wiring. Declassified records decades later revealed the Germans had intercepted limited radio traffic discussing U.S. convoy movements near Oran, giving them just enough information to prepare. They later determined these were early variants of the German Type GA influence mines. What troubled analysts most was not the mine itself, but how precisely it had been laid. Rockall Bank was not a common operational area for the Luftwaffe's mine-laying missions. These revelations forced the Allies to confront an uncomfortable truth. Mine warfare was no longer confined to deep-sea influence devices or predictable coastal barriers. It had become a flexible, improvisational weapon capable of blending into the maritime landscape itself. The assumption was that U-boats had dropped the mines in targeted clusters, each positioned at slightly different magnetic thresholds to ensure sequential destruction. Minesweepers arriving after the attack, including the British vessels HMS Cromarty and HMS Romney, found themselves working methodically through fields of floating markers that were indistinguishable from everyday tools of local fishermen. The application of this knowledge would influence Allied strategy for years. Engineers rushed to develop degaussing techniques, methods of reducing a ship's magnetic signature by running electric cables along the hull. The application of this hard-earned lesson had immediate effect. Future convoys supporting Torch adopted a new protocol. Any buoy or floating object within the approach corridor was presumed hostile until inspected. Merchant ships were rerouted along more heavily patrolled but theoretically safer waters, and specialized minesweeping flotillas were formed almost overnight. Yet even as improvements rolled out, commanders remained cautious. Engineers experimented with explosive grapnels, weighted hooks to drag beneath surface markers and detonate any hidden mines. American destroyers began maintaining greater offshore distances until minesweepers fully cleared the channel, despite the added vulnerability to air attack. One minesweeper captain later recalled, "It wasn't the mine itself that worried us. It was the knowledge that we would never know if we had found them all." Still, the human toll was heavy. A signal from USS Ludlow sent in the hours after the Leedstown strike captured the emotional weight. Convoy halted, cause uncertain, waters unsafe, request immediate sweeping assistance. As night fell on the shattered remnants of HX-72, the weight of the mystery settled in. How many more convoys had passed unknowingly over similar traps? How many losses previously attributed to U-boats had, in fact, been caused by mines that left no survivors to tell the difference. The fear in those words was palpable. Unknown mine types meant unknown tactics. Unknown tactics meant more ships could vanish before the threat was understood. The Admiralty's internal reports grew increasingly concerned about unconfirmed maritime disappearances in regions earlier assumed safe. In the weeks that followed, more magnetic mines were discovered along convoy routes, once considered too remote for deliberate German mine-laying. As the sun rose over the Algerian coastline, the calm water belied the devastation beneath it. The wrecks of UGF-1's transports settled slowly into the sand, their loss recorded, but their method of destruction only partially understood. This first major mine-related disaster of the Atlantic campaign left an imprint far deeper than the twisted hulls recovered afterward. It forced the Allies to acknowledge a new frontier of naval warfare, one that could not be chased, tracked, or negotiated with. A battlefield beneath the waves, silent and waiting. A new chapter in mine warfare had emerged, one where disguise, improvisation, and local collaboration blurred the boundaries of conventional naval strategy. And yet, as devastating as the Rockall incident was, it was only the beginning. For in the months ahead, as U.S. involvement in the North Atlantic increased, new minefields would appear in waters far more treacherous and far less understood. And yet, even this threat would pale compared to what awaited Allied fleets in 1944, as they prepared for the most ambitious amphibious assault in history, one that required clearing a labyrinth of mines across the English Channel, including a zone so feared it was known simply as Area Z. The story moves next to the wind-scoured waters south of Iceland, an expanse sailors came to call the Trench of Ghosts. By mid-1941, months before the United States formally entered the war, American destroyers assigned to the Neutrality Patrol were already shadowing Allied convoys under the guise of enforcing hemispheric security. In early 1944, as the Allies prepared for the colossal undertaking of Operation Overlord, a quiet but decisive battle unfolded far from the public eye. It was in these waters, cold and deceptively calm, that the line between confirmed U-boat attacks and unexplained disappearances began to blur. One such mystery surrounded the USS Reuben James, whose loss on October 31st would ignite debate not only about submarine strategy, but about whether naval mines had quietly played a larger role in earlier incidents dismissed as unknown causes. Beneath the gray, wind-lashed waters of the English Channel lay one of the most formidable obstacles to the coming invasion, a labyrinth of German minefields stretching from Cherbourg to the Belgian coast. For American sailors, the struggle began with an unsettling pattern. Ships were vanishing without the customary signs of submarine activity. There were no distress signals, no flares, no debris fields drifting across the currents. These fields, dense, layered, and constantly shifting, contained some of the most advanced influence mines produced during the war. Among them was a zone known only to Allied planners as Area Z, a sector so dangerous that even minesweeping veterans described it as a place where no man should sail twice. More troubling, some losses occurred well outside the patrol patterns of known U-boat wolf packs. The crew of the destroyer USS Hillary P. Jones recorded hearing a single concussive boom on June 27, an explosion so deep it barely broke the surface tension. The struggle began in February 1944, when the British Admiralty dispatched its specialized clearing force, the 9th and 31st Minesweeping Flotillas, along with Canadian units of the 31st Canadian Minesweeping Squadron. When the crew marked the position and later compared notes with British intelligence, they found no submarine operations recorded within 200 miles of the site. Their mission was unambiguous yet harrowing, clear enough of the German mine belts to carve safe channels for what would become the largest amphibious landing in history. But the complexity of the task became evident within days. This ambiguity weighed on crews already stretched thin. The Reuben James herself, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Haywood Kelly, had spent weeks escorting convoys from Newfoundland to Iceland. Storms regularly shifted the seabed, dragging tethered mines deeper or snapping their lines, while influence mines rested silently below, impervious to traditional sweeps. Sailors' diaries from that period speak frequently of phantom shocks felt through the hull, vibrations dismissed at the time as underwater volcanic activity. One petty officer wrote, "It sounded like a hammer strike far below us, not a torpedo, something deeper." The minesweepers worked blind, often relying more on intuition and experience than instrumentation. Suspicion quietly grew among officers that the Germans had begun seeding new types of influence mines along major convoy lanes, mines that required no tether and could drift with currents, settling unpredictably along shipping routes. Historical insight comes from the diary of Lieutenant Commander Robert McKinnon, serving aboard the Canadian minesweeper HMCS Cowichan. Historical insight into this tension comes from a lesser-known memorandum issued by the British Admiralty in August 1941. Classified until the 1970s, it noted, "Mine activity in northern approaches likely underestimated, drifting acoustic types suspected." In an entry dated March 12, he wrote, "The charts show open water. The sea tells otherwise. Our gear has brushed at least 3 devices we never saw." At the time, American officers received only fragments of such intelligence. This disconnect meant the Neutrality Patrol often sailed blind into contested waters with incomplete knowledge of what might lurk beneath them. McKinnon's words captured the central challenge. The Germans had laid mines in overlapping layers, mixing types so that even if magnetic mines were neutralized, pressure or acoustic devices would remain. When the Reuben James took station ahead of convoy HX-156 in late October, the crew believed they were preparing for a conventional U-boat engagement, not a hidden mine threat designed to obliterate a ship within seconds. The cold steel sinks into the strategic depths. Inside the casing, the clockwork of destruction begins its silent, calculated countdown. Clinging to the splintered wreckage of the bow, the last few men struggled against the vast, unforgiving scale of the North Atlantic following the attack. The reveal of Area Z's true lethality occurred on April 5, 1944. The 31st Canadian Minesweeping Squadron, tasked with probing what had been assessed as a moderate-risk corridor, began its sweep shortly after dawn. Defensive schematics illustrate the difference between a direct torpedo hit to the beam and an unseen failure originating from the keel. Under crisp morning light, Canadian crews work with precise focus, keenly aware of the vulnerability of their small ships and the scale of their essential mission. 2 serious U.S. Navy engineers analyze the critical structural drawings, calculating the integrity loss caused by the deep explosion impact marked beneath the destroyer's keel. At 09:14, a violent explosion tore through HMCS Mulgrave. The blast was so powerful, but it lifted the bow clear of the water before splitting the ship's forward compartments open. Cold, slicker-clad hands wrestle a sinister, heavily barnacled enemy mine from the icy depths onto the minesweeper's deck. Crippled and enveloped by spray, the Mulgrave was listing heavily in the churning water. Our deck crew stood paralyzed, grappling with the sudden catastrophe. An unsettling close-up of the complex hydrophone and unfamiliar wiring salvaged from the captured German acoustic mine. The schematic shows the lethal Type Y pressure wave impacting the hull, immediately followed by the secondary explosion that cripples HMCS Georgian on the surface. Commanders began to question whether intelligence failures had underestimated the reach of enemy submarines or perhaps overlooked more innovative mine-laying methods. Even today, historians debate the exact chain of decisions that allowed those mines to remain undetected until HX-72 sailed directly into their path. Battling the cold, turbulent deep of the mid-Atlantic, this small line of trawlers undertakes the immense and solitary duty of clearing the sea lanes. Adapting to the expanse of the North Atlantic, the American destroyer squadron maneuvers into a wide, staggered formation designed for maximum tactical coverage. Anticipating every Allied sweep, the Naval Command finalized their defensive routes, a quiet, satisfied nod sealing their perceived tactical advantage. Countless ships were recorded as lost. The archive's only official verdict for many remains the chilling ambiguity: missing enemy action. These rotating cross-sections detail the formidable complexity of the Type Y and B-type German mines, showcasing innovative and lethal trigger systems. The remnants of splintered wood and an expanding oil slick now mark the silent, empty grave of the vessel, evidence of a sinking too swift to survive. The seabed profile reveals a complex defensive strategy. Mines are carefully positioned within troughs and ridges, intentionally avoiding the paths of traditional sweeping cables to maximize lethality and survivability. Pounding through the North Atlantic darkness, the warship is momentarily swallowed by the mountainous, freezing spray of the heavy winter storm. A powerful magnetic pulse ripples through the water as the minesweeper deploys its electrified double L cable, securing the sea lanes. The intelligence ledger recorded successes that history would later expose as deliberate, often fatal, miscalculations. The inconspicuous drifter achieved its goal of showing no contact on the radar, but the internal system flashed warnings across the empty sweep. The dark, icy North Atlantic hides a secret field of acoustic death, where German mines patiently lurk beneath the waves, unnoticed by the Allied lifeline passing overhead. Exhaustion is etched into every line of these hands, silently fighting the endless sea and the unseen threat below. Ahead lay one of the most perplexing episodes of the war, an entire series of Mediterranean convoys that vanished in seas far clearer, calmer, and supposedly safer than the North Atlantic. Just moments before, they had seen its mast. Now the crew stared into the fading light at an impossible, empty sea. The Mediterranean, unlike the North Atlantic, was a sea of light, crystalline blue, deceptively tranquil, and steeped in thousands of years of maritime history. Yet, in 1942, it became a graveyard for Allied convoys attempting the perilous run to Malta. The faded military markings were the only surface evidence remaining. Beneath them stretched the silent, impossible black. It was here, along routes designated MG and MW, that the British Admiralty began to confront one of the most elusive threats of the entire war: pressure-triggered mines, so sensitive they could destroy a destroyer without the slightest surface disturbance.
For decades, the full records of Area Z remained sealed. When portions were finally released, they confirmed what many sailors had suspected. The number of mines cleared before D-Day was only an estimate.
Their most haunting appearance emerged during the doomed supply missions of early summer, when convoys seemed to vanish in waters long monitored by Allied patrol aircraft. The struggle intensified with the arrival of the 14th Minesweeping Flotilla, small, weather-worn vessels crewed by men who had spent the previous 2 years clearing minefields from the Channel to the Aegean. Some types recovered were so deteriorated or fragmentary that engineers could not reconstruct their original design. More unsettling, several known German mine variants expected to be present in the Channel were never found intact. When the flotilla reached Alexandria in March 1942, they were briefed not by typical intelligence officers, but by a hastily assembled team of naval engineers. The room was silent as engineers described German oyster mines, devices calibrated to detect pressure changes created by large moving hulls, detonating beneath the keel with staggering upward force. On June 6, 1944, when thousands of ships crossed the channels carved by the minesweepers, they did so through waters cleared at unimaginable cost. The silent battle beneath the waves had been won, but not completely understood. The mines left little trace, no floating debris, no burn patterns. One captain later noted, "It was as if the sea simply chose a ship and crushed it." And the next chapter, Part 6, would reveal how even after the war ended, entire convoys and their secrets remained lost in the deep, leaving behind questions that history has still not fully answered. As convoy MW-10 prepared to depart Alexandria for Malta in early June, tension hung over the crews like a physical weight. Malta's situation was desperate. Axis air power had reduced its supply reserves to nearly nothing. Every ship mattered. By the final months of World War II, the Allies had mapped thousands of minefields across the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the English Channel. Yet even as the conflict drew to a close, one truth remained persistent and unsettling. Not every loss had been explained. The convoy included the cruisers HMS Dido and HMS Cleopatra, accompanied by destroyers HMS Jervis, HMS Kelvin, and the veteran HMS Hasty. What no one fully understood was how extensively the Axis had seeded the approaches to Malta, nor how advanced the mines themselves had become. Entire convoys, single warships, and isolated merchantmen had vanished, with no confirmed U-boat attacks, no eyewitnesses, and no recoverable wreckage. The war's last chapter in mine warfare would prove to be not a victory lap, but a reckoning, a sobering confrontation with the limits of wartime records, technology, and human memory. Historical insight into this phase comes from a rarely cited entry in the war diary of Lieutenant Peter Houghton, a minesweeper officer aboard HMS Rye. He wrote, "The charts do not match the sea. Mines lie where no aircraft could have dropped them." The struggle began almost immediately after VE Day. Mine-sweeping squadrons from Britain, Canada, and the United States were tasked with the monumental job of clearing tens of thousands of influence mines left scattered across the world's shipping lanes. His remark hinted at one of the era's most debated questions. How had the Germans placed pressure mines in areas where Luftwaffe sorties had been minimal? Some were catalogued meticulously during the war. Others were laid hastily during retreats, offensives, or covert operations. Many mines had been deployed in makeshift ways, rolled off fishing vessels, dropped from low-flying aircraft, or released from submarines prowling under radio silence.
Now, in peacetime, the consequences of these irregular deployments came due.
Post-war analysis suggested that Italian submarines may have deployed them using new techniques, releasing mines designed to sink gradually and settle at predefined depths. This theory gained traction only after several recovered mines were examined in Taranto, revealing deployment mechanisms far more sophisticated than earlier Italian models.
The North Atlantic alone held areas so saturated with unexploded mines that the Royal Navy declared them no-go zones for years after the war. One such region was the notorious Convoy Grave Line, an unofficial name given by Allied sailors to a belt of ocean southwest of Ireland. The reveal came abruptly on June 13, 1942. Just after dawn, a deep column of water rose behind the destroyer HMS Hasty. It was here, in 1943 and 1944, that several small convoys reportedly lost ships under circumstances that commanders never fully deciphered. After the war, divers and trawlers occasionally snagged pieces of twisted steel on the seafloor, fragments believed to be from ships whose disappearances had never been conclusively investigated.
Listing dangerously after the explosion, the HMCS Georgian vents plumes of steam from its damaged side. Nearby vessels immediately initiated rescue operations. Historical insight into these lingering mysteries appears in a declassified 1946 British Admiralty document titled Post-Conflict Assessment of Maritime Losses. One passage reads, "Certain losses previously attributed to submarine attack cannot be reconciled with available enemy logs. Mine-related causes probable, yet unconfirmed."
The explosion came from directly beneath, lifting the vessel before shattering its keel. Survivors clung to rafts as the rest of the convoy pressed forward, each ship's crew now acutely aware that the sea around them was weaponized in ways they could neither see nor predict.
The statement refers to multiple convoys in which ships went down instantly and without communication, behavior more consistent with influence mines than torpedo strikes. But without survivors or intact wrecks, no final determinations could be made. In the strained silence of the dark cabin, he listened intently, searching for the slightest echo of danger beneath the waves.
The reveal of how extensive the problem truly was came between 1946 and 1948 during Operation Groundsheet, a joint British-American initiative to recover remnants of German prototype mines. Among the mines located off the Dutch coast and in the Bay of Biscay were rare variants of acoustic pressure hybrids, devices designed to respond to a combination of hull mass, speed, and propeller signature. But pressure mines could not be cut or detonated by traditional sweeping gear. The minesweepers could only mark suspected zones and signal the main convoy to reroute. These were believed to be experimental weapons deployed in limited numbers late in the war. More troubling was that several mines recovered during the operation did not match any known German production record. Even then, the water was too deep, the seabed too varied, the pressure triggers too sensitive. They were navigating blind. They carried unfamiliar wiring patterns, unusual triggering mechanisms, and pressure-sensitive plates of a type never described in captured documents. The application of these hard-earned lessons would eventually reshape Mediterranean convoy tactics. Engineers intensified development of double-hull pressure skirts and experimented with deploying smaller decoy vessels to map mine sensitivity. This discovery sparked concern among naval researchers. Had German engineers deployed prototype mines without leaving proper documentation? Had some been laid but never retrieved, leaving deadly remnants that continued sinking ships long after hostilities ceased?
The Royal Navy also began using slow-moving trawlers to generate wake signatures that might pre-detonate mines ahead of larger formations. Yet in 1942, during the height of the Malta crisis, such innovations were in their infancy.
And perhaps most unsettling, how many Allied wartime losses were the result of weapons the Allies never even knew existed? The convoys were forced to sail through danger zones with insufficient tools and incomplete intelligence. The human toll weighed heavily. A fragment of a signal from HMS Hebe later summarized the crew's despair: "We sweep water that cannot be swept."
The application of these findings reshaped how post-war navies approached mine countermeasures. New technologies emerged: variable depth sonar, remotely operated sweep drones, and magnetic signature reducers became standard equipment. Commanders realized that every new discovery about German mine technology raised further questions. Were the Axis powers testing prototypes in active convoy lanes? Had intelligence underestimated the role of Italian mine layers?
Yet, even with these advances, vast areas of ocean remained suspect. The Cold War only deepened the problem. Both the Soviet Union and NATO repurposed wartime minefields for their own strategic advantages, complicating the already murky historical record.
And perhaps most troubling, was there a type of influence mine capable of detonating beyond pressure thresholds? One that responded to turbulence, vibration, or a combination of triggers? No supernatural explanation was needed, only the sober understanding that Axis engineers were outpacing Allied countermeasures. The emotional toll on veterans remained profound. Sailors who had survived mine strikes often spoke of the terror of not knowing where the next blast might come from.
Minesweepers could clear what they found, but they could not clear what they could not detect. The sea had become a shifting battlefield where the enemy was not a vessel or a pilot, but a device lying silent on the seabed.
A 1947 Canadian Registry of Lost Minesweepers includes a haunting note beside the entry for HMCS Mulgrave's sister ship: exact cause of loss undetermined, mine detonation suspected. These unresolved entries, small, almost bureaucratic, carried heavy weight for families seeking closure.
As 1942 drew to a close, one truth became undeniable. The Mediterranean mine threat was evolving faster than the Allies could track, and the next major test would come not on the open sea, but along the North African coast, where a convoy bound for Operation Torch would encounter mines of an entirely different design, hidden among everyday fishing markers. In some cases, the sea returned fragments of the truth. In the 1950s, a British fishing trawler operating near the Isles of Scilly hauled up a barnacle-encrusted steel plate, later identified as part of the hull of a merchant ship, lost in 1941. The shoreline of North Africa in late 1942 was alive with deception. For months, German and Vichy-aligned forces had watched the buildup to Operation Torch, fully aware that Allied convoys would soon make landfall along the Algerian and Moroccan coasts. The vessel had vanished without a distress call, its final moments a mystery, until the discovery suggested a catastrophic under-keel explosion. Another case emerged in 1962, when Norwegian divers located a wreck in the Skagerrak split cleanly in two, a damage pattern unmistakably consistent with an influence mine detonation. These waters, shallow, cluttered, and seemingly well-charted, were assumed to be less conducive to sophisticated mine warfare, yet this assumption would become one of the most damaging miscalculations of the North African campaign. Even today, maritime historians continue to uncover evidence of mine-related losses once attributed to storms or unknown enemy action. The ocean floor is a slow archivist,
but a reliable one. For lurking among the ordinary fishing markers dotting the shoreline were disguised, tethered contact mines, primitive in appearance, but lethally precise in placement. Wrecks mapped by modern sonar show blast signatures that align closely with influence mine characteristics documented between 1940 and 1945. Upward shock columns, keel fractures, sudden mid-hull implosions. The sea, in its vastness, is gradually revealing what wartime secrecy and chaos obscured. Convoy UGF-1, the second major supply group supporting Operation Torch, departed Norfolk, Virginia in late October 1942. It was a massive formation. Troop transports, cargo vessels, and tank carriers escorted by American destroyers, including USS Ludlow, USS Bernardo, and USS Dallas. The close of this story is not a resolution, but an understanding. Naval mines, silent, patient, and devastating, played a far larger role in World War II than official wartime narratives ever fully acknowledged. Their mission was straightforward: deliver reinforcements and equipment to secure the beachheads established days earlier. Yet, as the convoy closed in on the Algerian coast, tensions simmered among officers, aware that German mine doctrine in the Mediterranean had already proven far more adaptable than previously believed. They claimed convoys without confrontation, erased ships without survivors, and altered strategies from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. They remain today as rusting reminders on the seabed, long after the guns of the war have fallen silent. The struggle unfolded in the early hours of November 11. A moonless sky hung over the convoy as it approached the shallow shelf near Cape Matifu.
And so, the legacy of these weapons endures, a shadow over wartime records, a puzzle for historians, and a solemn testament to the men and ships lost, not to storms or to surface enemies, but to the unseen dangers waiting in the deep. While sonar operators aboard the flagship USS Bristol detected nothing unusual, lookouts noted clusters of fishing buoys bobbing in irregular patterns. Initially dismissed as civilian gear left by local fishermen, the markers were ignored, an oversight that would have grave consequences. The story of WWII's most disturbing naval mines does not end with the war. It continues beneath the waves, where answers still lie buried in the cold and shifting dark.